The Battle of Seoul began at dawn Earth time, when the first Vorthik scout ships entered the inner solar system. The mechanical emperor had arranged his fleet in perfect formation, 10,000 ships moving with the precision that had conquered half the galaxy, but Admiral Kim was about to show him that precision meant nothing when facing an enemy willing to sacrifice everything. Commander Seok-jin led his suicide squadron toward the approaching armada, knowing that his mission was to guide the artificial black hole weapon into the heart of the enemy formation. His fighters were small and fragile compared to the massive Vorthik dreadnoughts, but they carried something more powerful than weapons. They carried the determination of a species that refused to surrender. The moon weapon activated just as the enemy fleet reached optimal range. Dr. Park watched from the command center as gravitational generators that had taken months to build created something that had never existed before in nature. The artificial black hole tore through space like a cosmic hurricane, pulling Vorthak ships into its deadly embrace. Captain Yuna commanded the left wing of Earth's defense fleet as mechanical fighters swarmed toward the planet. Like angry insects, her pilots flew with desperate courage through walls of enemy fire, knowing that every ship they destroyed was one less threat to their families below. The Vorthik Emperor watched in disbelief as his carefully ordered formation dissolved into chaos. The humans had turned their own moon into a weapon of unimaginable power. Ships that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries were torn apart by gravitational forces that his engineers had never imagined possible. But the real victory came from something the mechanical ruler had not anticipated. Across the galaxy, on every world touched by Vorthak tyranny, billions of enslaved beings rose up simultaneously. The signal had been coordinated through human communication networks, timed to coincide with Earth's desperate gambit. Lieutenant Colonel Na received reports from resistance cells on dozens of worlds as factory complexes and mining stations erupted in rebellion. The slaves who had built the Vorthik war machine were now tearing it apart from the inside, inspired by humanity's example of courage. Against impossible odds, General Hae-1 led the ground assault on the Vorthak command center unoccupied. Kepler 442b, her homeworld that had been turned into a mechanical fortress. Years earlier, human marines fought alongside alien freedom fighters through corridors that had once echoed with the screams of the oppressed. The artificial black hole continued its deadly work, consuming enemy ships faster than the Vorthak computers could calculate escape vectors. Admiral Kim watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction as the most powerful fleet in galactic history was reduced. The Vorthik Emperor stood in his command chamber, deep within the mechanical heart of the galaxy, watching tactical displays that showed rebellion spreading like wildfire across his domain. For 800 years, his empire had brought order to the chaos of organic life. Now these humans had shattered that order in less than 2 years. The mechanical ruler's processors calculated the probability of victory using conventional methods and found the results unacceptable: 17% chance of maintaining control over current territory, 34% chance of negotiated settlement, 8% chance of total victory. The numbers were stark reminders that something fundamental had changed in the galaxy. Admiral Kim received the intelligence report through coalition spy networks and felt her blood turn to ice. The Vorthak were gathering every available ship from across their empire, 10,000 vessels, including planet-killer weapons that could crack worlds in half. Their target was Earth itself, the blue world that had started this impossible rebellion. The human fleet commander stood before a holographic display of the solar system, while her staff officers ran calculations that all led to the same conclusion. Earth's defenses, even enhanced with coalition technology, could not hope to stop such a massive force through conventional warfare. Dr. So Young worked frantically in her laboratory aboard the flagship, trying to find some weakness in the approaching armada that humanity could exploit. The Vorthak had learned from their defeats and were approaching with overwhelming numbers. Rather than relying on superior tactics or technology, General Wu Jin commanded the defense preparations from his bunker beneath Geneva, knowing that if the enemy fleet reached Earth, it would mean the end of human civilization. He had mobilized every ship, every weapon, every soldier that humanity possessed, but the numbers still looked hopeless. The coalition survivors scattered across the galaxy, received emergency broadcasts calling for any ships that could still fight to rendezvous. At Earth, many had already given their lives in the rebellion, but those who remained began the long journey to humanity's homeworld. Knowing they might be flying to their deaths, Captain Valtar led a damaged cruiser and 6 escort ships on a desperate run through Vorthek-controlled space. His engines were failing and his life support systems were breaking down, but he pushed his crew to their limits because the humans had answered his people's call for help when no one else would. Dr. Park stood before the emergency session of the United Earth Council with a proposal, so desperate that even she could hardly believe she was suggesting it. They would turn Earth's own moon into a weapon using gravitational manipulation technology that the Coalition had provided, combined with human engineering ingenuity. The plan required every human in the solar system to work together. Engineers from the asteroid mining stations, technicians from the Mars colonies, even civilian volunteers who had never worked on military projects before. The moon's surface would bristle with gravitational generators that could create an artificial black hole. President Dayun authorized the project, knowing that failure would mean humanity's extinction, but also knowing that surrender was not an option. The humans had proven they could fight impossible odds, but this would be their greatest test. Chief Petty Officer Sun, he supervised the installation of Coalition gravity manipulators on Luna's surface, working 18-hour shifts as the deadline approached. The alien technology was incredibly complex, but human engineers found ways to integrate it with Earth systems using methods that impressed even their Coalition advisors. Commander Seok Jin prepared his squadron for what everyone knew would be a suicide mission. Someone had to guide the artificial black hole weapon to its target, and that meant flying directly into the path of the Vorthek fleet. His pilots were volunteers, all of them knowing they would not survive the mission. Lieutenant Colonel Mi Na coordinated the civilian evacuation from Earth's major cities while trying to maintain the illusion that everything was normal. The Vorthek could not know about the moon weapon until it was too late to stop. Panic among the population would only alert enemy spies. Admiral Kim met with Coalition leaders who had managed to reach Earth before the Vorthek blockade closed around the solar system. General one brought intelligence about enemy fleet formations, while Captain Yu Na provided technical data about Vorthek ship vulnerabilities. The Mechanical Emperor led his armada, personally determined to end the human threat once and for all. His flagship was a mobile fortress the size of a small moon, equipped with weapons that could sterilize entire continents. The organic beings who had dared to challenge his authority would learn the price of rebellion. Dr. Min Ho Lee worked with the best scientists from both species to fine-tune the gravitational weapon, knowing that they would have only one chance to use it successfully. The calculations had to be perfect, because even a small error would send the artificial black hole spinning out of control. Sergeant Kim trained civilian volunteers in the use of military equipment, because if the space battle failed, there would be ground fighting on Earth itself. The planet's population was not going to surrender without a fight. Even against impossible odds, the approach of the Vorthek fleet was detected by long-range sensors. When they were still 3 days away from Earth, the massive armada moved with mechanical precision, each ship in perfect formation as they prepared to end humanity's rebellion with overwhelming force. Captain J. Ho led the advanced scout ships that would provide early warning of the enemy's approach. His small vessels hid among the asteroids, watching as the largest fleet in galactic history made its way toward Earth. The sight was terrifying, but also magnificent in its deadly beauty. Admiral Bio Ram Kim addressed the combined human and Coalition fleets, knowing that many of those listening would not survive the next few days. We are fighting for more than just Earth, she said over the communication channels. We are fighting for the idea that freedom is worth any sacrifice. The civilian population of Earth went about their daily lives trying to maintain normalcy while secretly preparing for war. Children attended school while their parents hid weapons and supplies. Teachers conducted classes while military engineers installed defense systems in school basements. Commander Hai Jin ran final checks on the gravitational weapon systems, knowing that 800 years of Vorthek dominance would end or continue based on whether their desperate plan succeeded. The moon had been transformed into something that looked peaceful from Earth, but was actually the most powerful weapon ever created. The Refugee fleets from across the galaxy began arriving at the edge of the solar system, bringing every ship that could still fight species that had been enemies. For centuries flew in formation together, united by their hatred of the mechanical oppressors and their admiration for human courage. Dr. Lee intercepted Vorthok communications and learned that the mechanical emperor was confident of victory. The enemy had calculated human capabilities based on their previous encounters and concluded that even Earth's defenses could not stop such overwhelming numbers. Lieutenant Commander So Young worked with coalition scientists to develop backup plans. In case the gravitational weapon failed, they prepared conventional nuclear devices enhanced with alien technology that could at least damage the enemy fleet even if they could not stop it completely. The final day arrived with Earth's population. Watching the skies as tiny points of light appeared among the stars, the Vorthok fleet had arrived in the outer solar system and was beginning its approach toward humanity's homeworld. The most important battle in galactic history was about to begin. Admiral Kim stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the tactical display as 10,000 enemy ships arranged themselves in perfect attack formation. The mechanical emperor's voice came over the communication channels, offering humanity one final chance to surrender. The answer came not in words but in actions as Earth's defenders powered up their weapons and prepared to make their stand. The moon's gravitational generators hummed with barely contained energy while human and alien crews made their final preparations. The mechanical emperor looked at the pathetic human defenses and calculated victory with 99% certainty. His fleet would sweep aside the organic resistance and bring order back to the galaxy. What he did not know was that humanity's greatest weapon was not any piece of technology, but their willingness to sacrifice everything for freedom. The battle of Soul was about to begin, and the galaxy held its breath as two completely different philosophies of existence prepared to clash among the stars. The machines sought order and control while the humans fought for chaos and choice. The winner would determine the future of all life in the galaxy and the deep space observatories scattered across. Human space amateur astronomers turned their telescopes toward Earth, knowing they were about to witness either humanity's greatest triumph or its final defeat. Either way, it would be a sight that would be remembered for as long as intelligent life existed among the stars. The news traveled faster than light itself, spreading through secret communication networks that the Vorthok had never discovered. On mining worlds and factory planets across the galaxy, enslaved beings whispered the impossible truth to each other. In hidden corners and forgotten tunnels, the humans had won. The mechanical empire could be defeated. Captain Yuna Song stood in the command center of the liberated mining station on Zarian Prime, watching as thousands of former slaves emerged from the underground tunnels where they had hidden for 3 years. Her ground forces had taken the facility in just 6 hours, using tactics that the Vorthok overseers could not have predicted in their wildest calculations. The battle for Zarian Prime had begun when Song's infiltration teams landed in stolen cargo ships disguised as routine supply deliveries. The mechanical guards never suspected that the containers they were unloading contained human soldiers armed with weapons that had been designed specifically for urban warfare against robotic enemies. Sergeant Dongwu Kim led his squad through the industrial complex, using maintenance shafts and cooling ducts to move unseen through the facility. The aliens who had built this place had never imagined that someone might use their own infrastructure against them. Every ventilation system became a highway, every power conduit became a route to critical systems. The enslaved workers could hardly believe their eyes when human soldiers appeared in their barracks like ghosts materializing from the walls. These small, pale beings moved with deadly purpose through corridors that had been patrolled by mechanical sentries for years. The guards that had seemed so invincible lay scattered in pieces, their circuits fried by weapons the slaves had never seen before. Dr. Young worked alongside the liberated prisoners to turn their mining equipment into weapons of rebellion. The massive ore processors became bomb factories while drilling. Machines were converted into artillery pieces. The slaves had been forced to learn every system in the complex, and now that knowledge became the key to their freedom, the Vorthok commander of Zarian Prime sent desperate messages to his superiors. Describing attacks that defied all logical analysis, the human forces struck from sewers and air ducts appeared in secured areas that should have been impossible to reach and seemed to anticipate every countermeasure before it could be implemented. Lieutenant Colonel Min Seo coordinated the final assault from a command post that had been carved out of solid rock deep beneath the main mining facility. Her tactical display showed Vorthic reinforcements approaching from orbit, but she knew they would arrive. Too late, the humans had learned to move fast and strike hard before the enemy could respond. The liberated aliens fought alongside their human rescuers with a determination that surprised even the battle-hardened soldiers. Former slaves who had never held weapons before picked up plasma rifles and charged Vorthak positions while screaming battle cries in languages the machines could not translate. Captain J1 led the space battle above Zarian Prime as Vorthak reinforcements tried to retake the mining facility. His small fleet used the asteroid field around the planet as cover, darting between the floating rocks to launch surprise attacks on enemy ships. The mechanical pilots could calculate trajectories perfectly, but they could not predict the crazy maneuvers that human pilots used. The victory at Zarian Prime sent ripples across the galaxy as news spread through underground networks that most authorities did not even know existed. Former Coalition General Kayardan, who had been captured during the fall of his homeworld, found himself leading a mixed group of human marines and alien prisoners in an assault on the detention center where he had been held. The old general watched in amazement as Sergeant Kim disabled a Vorthic war machine using nothing but determination and a handful of mining charges. The human soldier moved like a dancer through the mechanical creature's attacks, finding weak points that had never appeared in any technical manual. How do you do it? Kayardan asked Admiral Kim during the victory celebration as liberated slaves danced with human soldiers in the main plaza of the mining complex. My people trained for war for centuries, but you have been spacefaring for barely 50 years. How do you keep winning? Admiral Kim looked out at the celebrating crowd, where humans and aliens worked together to repair the damage caused by years of mechanical oppression. We do not fight to build an empire or prove we are better than anyone else, she replied. We fight because someone needs help, and we are the ones who showed up. The psychological impact of the human victories was spreading faster than the military campaigns themselves. On world after world, Vorthic administrators reported increasing incidents of sabotage and rebellion as enslaved populations began to believe that freedom might actually be possible. Dr. Young analyzed intelligence reports from across the galaxy and discovered patterns that even the Coalition had missed. The Vorthic Empire was not as monolithic as everyone believed. Individual sectors operated with significant autonomy, and communication between distant regions was slower than expected. This weakness could be exploited. Commander Haijin established training camps on liberated worlds where human instructors taught alien volunteers the basics of guerrilla warfare. The techniques that had worked on Zarian Prime could be adapted to other environments as long as the fighters understood the basic principles of speed, surprise, and flexibility. The mechanical emperor himself became aware of the growing crisis as entire sectors began reporting coordination breakdowns. The humans were not just winning battles, they were inspiring a galaxy-wide rebellion that threatened the very foundations of Vorthok control. Captain Vel Tar commanded a mixed fleet of human and coalition ships that struck at enemy supply lines throughout the Outer Rim. His forces moved like shadows, appearing at vulnerable convoys and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. The Vorthok logistics network began to break down under the constant pressure. Lieutenant Commander Sojin led commando raids on Vorthak research facilities seeking to capture advanced technology and intelligence about enemy capabilities. Her teams moved through heavily defended installations like smoke, disrupting security systems and vanishing with critical data before alarms could even sound. The liberated worlds began to form their own defense networks coordinated through human communication systems that the Vorthak could not crack. Former slaves became soldiers and former prisoners became leaders as the rebellion spread from system to system. Major Yumin established a network of safe houses and supply depots that allowed resistance fighters to operate across vast distances. The humans had learned from their own history that successful rebellions required more than just winning battles. They needed infrastructure and logistics. The Vorthek response was predictably brutal. Worlds that showed signs of rebellion were subjected to devastating orbital bombardments that turned entire continents into glass. But for every world they destroyed, two more rose up to take its place. The empire that had seemed invincible was beginning to crack. Dr. Minho Lee intercepted Vorthek military communications and discovered that the mechanical leadership was deeply divided about how to respond to the human threat. Some wanted to negotiate while others demanded the complete extermination of all organic life. The disagreement was slowing their decision-making process. General Haywon worked with human strategists to identify key targets that would maximum damage to enemy morale and capabilities. The Vorthek had grown complacent during their centuries of dominance, and many of their most important facilities were inadequately defended. The turning point came when 3 entire Vorthak battle groups defected to the rebellion. Their mechanical crews had been isolated from the command network so long that they had begun to develop independent thoughts. Some of them actually preferred the chaos and unpredictability of fighting alongside humans to the rigid order of the Empire. Admiral Kim realized that they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans had not just started a military campaign, they had triggered a fundamental shift in how entire civilizations thought about freedom and resistance. The Vorthek Empire was crumbling from within as its own assumptions about superiority and control were challenged. Captain Mi Jin led a series of raids on enemy communication hubs, disrupting the networks that held the mechanical empire together. Each successful attack made it harder for Vorthek commanders to coordinate their responses and easier for human forces to predict enemy movements. The galaxy began to change as world after world threw off the chains of mechanical oppression. Species that had been enemies for centuries found themselves fighting side by side against the Vorthek threat. The humans had given them something more valuable than weapons or tactics. They had given them hope. Commander Dong Wu established training academies where former slaves learned to become teachers, passing on the lessons of human warfare to new generations of freedom fighters. The rebellion was becoming self-sustaining, no longer dependent on human leadership for its continued existence. As the tide turned across the galaxy, Admiral Kim prepared for the next phase of the campaign. The Vorthek Empire was wounded but not defeated. The Mechanical Emperor would soon realize that half measures would not be enough to stop the human-inspired rebellion. The real test was yet to come. The humans had proven they could fight and win, but now they would face an enemy that was desperate enough to risk. The Vorthak scout fleet appeared on the sensors like a cluster of metal thorns against the black canvas of space. Admiral Kim studied the formation from the bridge of the flagship, while her mixed crew of humans and aliens prepared for their first battle together. 3 enemy dreadnoughts, supported by dozens of smaller vessels, moved toward them with the mechanical precision that had conquered 17 worlds. Captain Veltar watched the human commander with fascination as she analyzed the enemy positions. His people had fought the Vorthek hundreds of times, always using the same honorable tactics that had served the coalition for centuries. Direct assault, maximum firepower, overwhelming the enemy through superior numbers and technology. But the humans were about to show him a completely different way to wage war. Admiral Kim turned to her communications officer, Lieutenant Sung-min, and gave the order that would change everything. All ships execute pattern Delta 7, she said calmly. Her voice carried no trace of fear, even though they were outnumbered 3-1. Make it look convincing. The human fleet suddenly broke formation, scattering in all directions like frightened animals fleeing from predators. The Vorthak sensors registered what appeared to be a complete rout as coalition and human ships turned away from the enemy and began accelerating toward the outer system. The mechanical minds controlling the enemy fleet calculated victory probability at 97%, but Commander Hai-jin knew something the Vorthek did not. This was not retreat, but the opening move in a game the machines had never learned to play. She led her squadron of fighters in a wide arc around the battlefield, staying just outside enemy sensor range while the larger ships continued their apparent flight. The aliens in her wing followed her lead, trusting human tactics. They did not understand the Vorthek pursuit came exactly as Admiral Kim had predicted. The enemy dreadnoughts broke their defensive formation and gave chase, believing they were mopping up the remnants of a defeated force. Their escort ships spread out to prevent any coalition vessels from escaping the system. This was the moment the humans had been waiting for. Captain Jeho received the signal and brought his fighters. Screaming in from the enemy's blind spot, the Vorthok had calculated every possible angle of attack except the one that seemed completely suicidal. His modified ships dove toward the massive flagship like moths attacking a bonfire, their small size making them nearly impossible to target effectively. The enemy point defense systems opened fire, filling space with deadly energy beams, but the human pilots flew patterns that defied all logical prediction. They rolled and twisted through the killing field using instincts developed in atmospheric combat, where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. The aliens flying alongside them struggled to match their erratic movements. Dr. Min-Ho Lee had spent weeks studying Vorthok communication patterns from the safety of the research labs. Now his theoretical work became deadly reality as he activated the signal jammers that human engineers had built into every ship. The enemy coordination network began to break down as random interference disrupted their battle algorithms. The Vorthok flagship suddenly found itself isolated as its escort vessels struggled to respond to conflicting orders. The mechanical crew had never experienced communication breakdown on this scale. Their programming demanded they follow predetermined battle protocols, but those protocols assumed perfect information flow between all units. Admiral Kim saw her chance and ordered the main attack. The human and coalition ships that had been pretending to flee suddenly reversed course and came roaring back toward the enemy. Their weapons blazed as they focused all their firepower on the confused Vorthok formation. The machines tried to adapt, but their response time was slowed by the communication chaos. Lieutenant Commander So-Jin led the boarding assault on the enemy command ship. Her team of human marines and coalition warriors moved through the metal corridors like ghosts, using tactics that the Vorthok defenders could not predict. They struck from ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels, turned the ship's own systems against its crew, and fought with a ferocity that left the mechanical beings unable to calculate proper responses. The battle turned into a rout as the Vorthok fleet found itself outmaneuvered and outfought by forces they had dismissed as inferior. The mechanical Emperor's scouts sent panicked reports back to their command ships, describing enemy tactics that made no sense according to their understanding of warfare. These organic beings fought without honor, without logic, and without regard for their own safety. Captain Yuna-san disabled the second Vorthok dreadnought by ramming her damaged cruiser into its engine section. The impact sent both ships spinning out of control, but her sacrifice allowed coalition bombers to penetrate the enemy's defenses and deliver the killing blow. Her last transmission was heard across the entire battlefield as she shouted for her crew to evacuate before the collision. The third enemy ship tried to retreat but found its escape route blocked by human fighters that had somehow predicted its movements. Commander Mi-Jin led the final assault, using her squadron's superior maneuverability to stay inside the dreadnought's weapons arc where its massive guns could not target them. The enemy's armor meant nothing when they could not bring their weapons to bearing. Less than 2 hours, the entire Vorthok scout fleet had been destroyed or disabled. The survivors found themselves prisoners of an enemy they could not understand, beings who fought like demons but treated captured foes with surprising mercy. General Haewon watched in amazement as human medics worked to save wounded Vorthok soldiers despite having lost friends in the battle. The victory sent shockwaves through both the Coalition and the Vorthok Empire. For the first time in centuries, the mechanical fleet had been decisively defeated by what should have been an inferior force. News of the battle spread quickly through hyperspace channels, carried by refugee ships and resistance networks that had been quiet for too long on dozens of conquered worlds. Alien slaves looked up at the stars with new hope. The humans had arrived, and they fought like nothing anyone had ever seen before. They used tricks and deception where others relied on honor. They struck from unexpected angles and turned enemy strengths into weaknesses. They were small and weak individually, but together they were more dangerous than entire armades. Captain Veltar found Admiral Kim in the aftermath, studying battle recordings and making notes for future engagements. How did you know they would break formation? He asked, still struggling to understand what he had witnessed. Your tactics made no sense according to any military doctrine. I have ever studied. Admiral Kim smiled as she looked out at the debris field. That had once been 3 Vorthik dreadnoughts. That is exactly why they work, she replied. The enemy has fought the same way for so long that they cannot imagine any other approach. When you always do the expected thing, you become predictable, and predictable enemies are easy to defeat. Dr. Minho Lee was already working on improvements to their jamming systems, having discovered that Vorthik communications were even more vulnerable to disruption than he had hoped. The mechanical beings relied so heavily on their network connections that cutting those links left them nearly helpless. Every ship in the human fleet would be equipped with upgraded jammers before their next battle. The prisoners were interrogated using techniques that the Coalition had never considered. The humans did not torture or threaten. Instead, they simply talked to the captured Vorthak as if they were people rather than machines. Some of the mechanical beings had not engaged in actual conversation for decades, and found the experience strangely compelling. Lieutenant Dongwoo Kim discovered that individual Vorthak soldiers retained more independence than their commanders realized. When separated from the command network, they could make their own decisions, and some of them were beginning to question the Empire's goals. The implications were staggering, suggesting that the enemy might not be as unified as everyone believed as. The combined fleet prepared for their next mission. Admiral Kim addressed her crews once again. The enemy knows about us now, she warned. They will adapt their tactics and send larger forces. But we have something they will never understand. We know how to change, how to learn, how to become something new when the old ways stop working. The Rigel victory was just the beginning. The humans had proven they could fight and win, but the real test would come when the Vorthik Empire sent its full attention toward these troublesome organic beings. The Mechanical Emperor was already dispatching investigation fleets to determine how such a small force had achieved the impossible. Commander Hai Jin ran simulations of future battles, knowing that each engagement would be harder than the last. The element of surprise was gone now, and the enemy would be prepared for human tactics. But she also knew that her people's greatest strength was not any single trick or strategy. It was their ability to keep changing, to keep finding new ways to win when victory seemed impossible. Galaxy watched and waited as news of the human victory spread. Some species began to whisper about resistance, about fighting back against their mechanical oppressors. Others dismissed the battle as a fluke, believing that the Vorthik would soon crush these upstart humans like they had crushed everyone else. None of them understood what humanity had really brought to the galactic stage. It was not just new tactics or better weapons, it was a Dr. So Young Park was drinking her 3rd cup of coffee when the alien transmission appeared on her computer screen at the Mars Research Station. The xenobiologist had been studying radio signals from deep space for 5 years, hoping to find proof that Earth was not alone in the universe. Now that proof sat before her in the form of a desperate plea from a dying civilization. The message played over and over as So Young tried to process what she was hearing. The voice belonged to something that was clearly not human, speaking in perfect Turian through some kind of universal translator. The words painted a picture of cosmic horror that made her hands shake as she reached for her communication device. Within 6 hours, So Young was standing in the emergency session chamber of the United Earth Council in Geneva. The most powerful leaders on the planet sat around a circular table while she explained what the coalition message meant for humanity. The debate that followed would determine the fate of not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. General Wu Jin slammed his fist on the table, making the water glasses jump. You want us to fight aliens we have never met, against other aliens we know nothing about, he shouted, his face red with anger. We barely have enough ships to defend our own solar system. How can we possibly take on an intergalactic empire president? Dayun nodded slowly as she reviewed the technical data that So Young had provided. The coalition was offering technology that could advance human civilization by thousands of years, faster than light travel energy weapons that could power entire cities, medical advances that could eliminate disease and extend human life. But the price was war against an enemy that had already destroyed 17 World Secretary of Defense men. Jay stood up and walked to the large display showing Earth floating peacefully in space. If we help these aliens, we expose ourselves to dangers we cannot imagine, he said quietly. But if we refuse and they fall, then what happens when these Vorthek machines come looking for new worlds to conquer? So Young felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. She had spent her entire career dreaming of first contact with alien life, but never like this, never with the fate of billions hanging in the balance. She looked around the room at the faces of people who would decide humanity's future. These beings reached out to us because they believe we are different, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. They have studied us, watched our history, seen how we fight when everything seems hopeless. They think we can succeed where their greatest warriors have failed. Admiral Ram Kim had been silent throughout the debate, but now she leaned forward in her chair. I have read every battle report in human history, she said calmly. We have always been at our best when we fight for something bigger than ourselves, when we protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is who we are as a species. The vote was scheduled for the next morning, but So Young could not sleep. She walked through the corridors of the council building thinking about the alien voice in that transmission, the fear and hope mixed together. The desperate plea of someone who had watched his world burn. She thought about her own family, her younger brother who worked as a teacher, her parents who had sacrificed everything to give her the education that led to this moment. At dawn, the council convened again. The vote was close, but humanity chose to answer the coalition's call. Admiral Kim was given command of Earth's small but determined fleet. 12 ships that had been designed for exploration and asteroid mining would now carry the hopes of 2 civilizations into battle against an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy. The preparation began immediately. Human engineers worked alongside coalition survivors who had managed to escape the Vorthek advance. The reptilian captain Veltar could not hide his amazement as he watched humans modify their simple chemical rockets with alien technology that bent the laws of physics. Your people work differently than mine, he told Admiral Kim as they stood in the shipyard watching. Human welders attach plasma cannons to cargo vessels. We think in straight lines following plans and procedures, but you see problems as puzzles to solve. You make connections that we would never consider. Lieutenant Commander Haijin had been a test pilot before the alien message arrived. Now she found herself learning to fly spacecraft that could cross the galaxy in days instead of centuries. The controls felt strange under her hands, but the basic principles were the same as flying any vehicle. Trust your instincts, react quickly, and never give up no matter how bad things look. The first coalition refugees arrived at the secret rendezvous point near Jupiter. Their ships were damaged and their crews exhausted from running battles with Vorthek scout fleets. Dr. Min-Ho Lee worked with alien scientists to understand their technology while human mechanics used Earth tools and ingenuity to repair systems that were beyond anything they had ever seen. Captain J-Ho commanded a squadron of modified fighters that had been built for atmospheric flight. Now they carried weapons that could punch holes through starship armor. He spent hours in the simulators learning to fight in 3 dimensions without gravity or air resistance. The aliens watched in fascination as humans adapted to space combat with the same creativity they brought to everything else. General Haewon arrived on the refugee ship Destiny, her left arm still in a medical brace from the final battle on her homeworld. She met with Admiral Kim in the flagship's briefing room, sharing intelligence about Vorthek tactics and technology. The human commander listened carefully, asking questions that revealed a mind focused on finding weaknesses in seemingly invincible enemies. Fight like machines because they are machines, Haewon explained. They follow predictable patterns, optimized for maximum efficiency, but efficiency is not the same as adaptability. When you show them something they have never seen before, their response time increases by several seconds. Those seconds could mean the difference between victory and defeat. So Young worked with coalition scientists to develop new weapons and tactics that combined human creativity with alien technology. The result was a hybrid approach to warfare that neither species could have achieved alone. As the combined fleet prepared for its first mission, Admiral Kim addressed the crews over the communication system. Humans and aliens working together for the first time in galactic history, we are about to face an enemy that has never been defeated, she said, her voice carrying to every ship in the formation. But we have something they do not expect. We have each other. The fleet moved out toward the Rigel system, where Vorthak scouts had been reported the ships looked small against the vast emptiness of space, but they carried something more powerful than weapons or armor. They carried the hopes of everyone who believed that sometimes the smallest force could change the course of history. Commander Mi-jin sat in her fighter cockpit running through pre-flight checks while thinking about her grandmother who had survived the Korean War. The old woman had always said that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite being afraid. Now Mi-jin understood what those words really meant as she prepared to face an enemy that had conquered worlds. The journey to battle would take 3 days, giving the mixed crews time to train together and learn each other's strengths. Human engineers showed coalition mechanics how to improvise repairs using whatever materials were available, while alien weapons specialists taught human gunners how to target enemy weak points with precision that had been developed over centuries of warfare. None of them knew that their first battle would come sooner than expected, or that the Vorthak Empire was about to face something it had never encountered before, a species that refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare and would do whatever it took to protect those who could not protect themselves. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had arrived, and they fought like nothing anyone had ever seen. The red sky of Kepler 442b burned like fire above Ambassador Taemin as he ran through the smoking ruins of what had once been the greatest city in the galaxy. Coalition forces scattered around him, dragging wounded soldiers and civilians toward the emergency bunkers. The screaming of Vorthak war machines filled the air like the cries of metal demons hunting for prey. Min stumbled over broken concrete, his scaled green skin cut and bleeding from the battle that had raged for 3 days. Straight his people, the Zephyrians, had been proud warriors once, but now they were nothing more than refugees running from an enemy that could not be stopped. The Vorthak Empire had come to their world like a plague of steel and circuits, turning everything they touched into twisted metal and ash. Inside the underground command center that shook with each explosion above, Taemin found the last working quantum communicator. The device hummed with power, but he knew it would not last much longer. The Vorthak were jamming most frequencies, and soon they would find this bunker too. He had, perhaps minutes before death, found him and his remaining people. General Hae-1 stumbled into the room, her armor cracked and her left arm hanging useless. At her side, she had been fighting for 72 hours without rest, leading the final defense of their capital city. Now she looked at Taemin with eyes that had seen too much death. The humans, she said between gasps for air, you still think they will help us? They are children playing with rockets while we face the greatest threat the galaxy has ever known. Taemin did not answer immediately. He activated the communicator and began searching for the frequency that would reach the small blue world called Earth. The Coalition had been watching humanity for decades. Ever since they first split the atom and reached for the stars, most species in the galaxy thought humans were too primitive to matter, too young to understand the dangers that lurked between the stars. But Tae-min had studied their transmissions, their art, their stories. He had watched them fight wars among themselves with a ferocity that impressed even veteran Coalition warriors. He had seen how they never gave up. Even when facing impossible odds, there was something different about humans, something that made them dangerous in ways that other species could not understand. The communicator crackled to life, and Taemin began recording his message. He knew this might be the last thing he ever did, but he also knew it might be the only chance his people had for survival. The Vorthak had destroyed 17 Coalition worlds in the past year, each time they grew stronger, absorbing the technology and resources of the defeated, turning living planets into factory worlds that produced more war machines. People of Terra, he began, his voice shaking with exhaustion and fear. We are the Galactic Coalition, and we are dying. We have watched your species from the darkness between stars. We know you are young. We know you have barely reached beyond your own moon, but we have nowhere else to turn in. Explosion rocked the bunker, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. Emergency lights flickered as power systems struggled to maintain function. Tae-min could hear the mechanical whirring of Vorthak scout drones getting closer to their hiding place. He had to hurry. For 300 years, the Coalition has kept peace in this galaxy. We have protected the weak and stopped those who would destroy entire worlds. but now we face an enemy that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be stopped by anything we have tried. The Vorthic Empire sees all organic life as inferior. They turn our worlds into metal graveyards, and our people into fuel for their machines. General Hay one placed her good hand on Taemin's shoulder. She had lost her entire family in the first Vorthic attack on their homeworld. Her husband and 3 children had been in the capital city when the metal death ships arrived. She had nothing left except the hope that somehow, somewhere in the galaxy, there might be someone willing to help. Your species fights differently than ours, Taemin continued. We have studied your history, your wars, your stories. You do not give up when others would surrender. You find ways to win when victory seems impossible. We need that strength now. We need someone who thinks like you do, who fights like you do. The sound of metal feet echoed through the corridors. Above them, the Vorthak ground forces had found the bunker entrance and were cutting their way through the blast doors. Taemin could hear the high-pitched whine of plasma cutters eating through solid steel. He had minutes at most before the machines would flood into their sanctuary. We offer you everything we have, our technology, our knowledge, the location of every safe world in the galaxy. In return, we ask only that you help us survive. We know it seems impossible. We know you have your own problems, your own wars, your own struggles, but if the Vorthak succeed in destroying us, they will not stop. They will spread across the galaxy like a virus, consuming everything until only metal and circuits remain. Taemin paused, looking at the faces around him, young soldiers barely old enough to fight, elderly civilians who had lived through decades of peace before this nightmare began, scientists and engineers who had spent their lives building things only to watch them destroyed by enemies who cared nothing for creation, only consumption. Your world would be next, he said quietly. Earth, with its blue oceans and green forests, would become another factory for their war machine. Your children, your families, everything you love would be ground up and fed into their endless hunger for conquest. This is not just our war anymore. This is a fight for the future of all organic life in the galaxy. The blast doors above them began to glow red hot as the Vorthak cutters broke through. Sparks rained down like deadly snow, and the smell of melting metal filled the air. General Haywan drew her sidearm, knowing it would do little good against what was coming, but unwilling to die without a fight. We do not know if this message will reach you, Tae Min said, speaking faster now as death approached. We do not know if you will care about the fate of aliens you have never met. We do not even know if you are capable of helping us, but we are sending you the coordinates of our remaining strongholds, the frequencies of our military channels, everything we can give. Youth first. Vorthak warrior broke through the ceiling, a thing of black metal and glowing red sensors. It moved with mechanical precision, scanning the room for targets. Its weapons powered up with a sound like distant thunder, preparing to end the lives of everyone in the bunker. If you receive this message, if you have any compassion in your hearts, if you believe that life should not bow to death and creation should not yield to destruction, then please help us. We are the Galactic Coalition, and we are making our last stand against the darkness. The transmission ended just as the Vorthak opened fire. Taemin dove behind the communicator console as plasma bolts lit up the room like deadly lightning. He did not know if his message had been sent. He did not know if humans would receive it, or if they would care enough to act. He knew only that he had done everything possible to save his people in the chaos that followed. As coalition soldiers made their final desperate stand against the mechanical invaders, none of them could have imagined that on a small research station orbiting Mars, a young human scientist named So-Young Park was about to change the course of galactic history forever. The message traveled through hyperspace toward Earth, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of an entire civilization, while behind it the Vorthak continued their relentless march across the stars, consuming everything in their path and leaving only silence where once there had been life.